My name is Cecil, and I'm an alcoholic. And just because we did win the World Series was no reason not to put my name up there. Or perhaps you put it up there and put it upside down. I don't know. Just thought I'd throw that in. That's to do with the flag, so I think nothing wrong with doing my name. And I'm very grateful to be here, and it's nice to be the second oldest member in the crowd. This always happens to me. Just as I think I'm going to win that thing, all of a sudden someone is older than me. And I understand I'm pinch hitting for Clancy. That really upsets me. But, you know, when you're 40 years sober, you have to do these things and accept them and not let them bother you. I belong to the Big Book Fellowship Group in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, Canada. My sobriety date is January 16th, 1952. I don't know whether that impresses you, but it sure impresses me, I'll tell you. Talking about impressing people, I heard a story about a young fellow. He was probably training to be an alcoholic. He was a young minister, and he was just finished school, and he got this new church, and he thought, well, he would just sneak into town and see what things were like without telling anybody. And he went up in a train, and he got off the train, went to the church, and he looked around, and it was kind of dirty outside and things, but he figures, well, I'll get this straightened around a little while. And he went inside, and he stood up in the pulpit, and he thought of all the great sermons he was going to deliver, and then he went into his office, and he sat down in his big chair behind his big desk, and he was thinking of all the people he was going to counsel and get straightened out. And a knock came to the door, and he said, come in, and as he said, come in, he picked the phone up. And a young fellow walked in, and he's talking on the phone, and he said, no, I can't come. You had the first chance to get me. But he said, you didn't answer me in time. I decided to take this place, and I'm sorry. I guess God decided I should be here. And he said, no, I can't come down. But I said, it won't take me long to get this parish straightened out. And he said, I'll come down for a couple of days and get yours straightened out, too. With that, he hung the phone up. And he looked at the young fellow that come through the door, and he said, young man, I'm your new minister. And he said, from here on in, I'll be dealing by appointment only, but seeing you're here, I'll take a few minutes of your time. And the young fellow says, preacher, I won't be taking much of your time. He says, I just came to connect the telephone up. So sometimes it doesn't pay to try to impress people. I would like to ask you a favor. My chairman tonight picked me up at the airplane, and I would like you to have somebody younger drive me back. And I say that because I get a pension from when I was in the service, and I'm not supposed to carry things. And usually some nice young fella meets me, even girls that meet me carry my suitcase. But not that fella that picked me up, whatever his name is. He doesn't park near the airport either. Quarter of a mile away. And I lugged it over there. And so if just somebody, because I know he's not going to help me on the way back, so give me a new driver. That's all I ask. It says here to talk slow into the microphone. That reminds me of another story about a fellow that belonged to this church, and they had a money-raising project, the same as you have all these money-raising projects, and they decided to sell Bibles. And one lady went out and sold 6, 7 Bibles, another one sold 10, another one sold 12. A guy came in and he'd sold 143 Bibles. And the minister grabbed him and took him into another room and got all the congregation there, and he says, tell us, how did you sell 143 Bibles? And he said, well, it was like this. He said, I would walk up to the door and I would ring the doorbell. And when they came to the door, I would tell them that I am selling Bibles. And then I would ask them if they wanted to buy one or would they like me to read it to them. So I'm not going to talk slow. I'm going to talk fast. And I'm very grateful to be here, and I would like to thank the committee for inviting me to pinch hit for Clancy. And also for all of the hospitality that you've given me and this beautiful facility. And believe me, this is a fantastic place to have a roundup. And if any of you don't believe in God, just tomorrow morning go for a walk down the hill, and then walk up the hill. And I guarantee before you get here, you'll believe in God. Because I had to pray all the way up the hill. And I've had a good time. It's great to be with Jay and with Peggy and with Chink, of course. I've only met Jay this trip. I met him before once in West Palm Beach, I think, with Wesley Parrish. But Peggy and Chink, of course, we've known each other a long time. And that taper there, whoever comes along with Peggy, I know him. And he's a nice fellow. And I've just had a good time. And I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about my drinking tonight. I don't think it really matters. I'm going to tell you this, though. I'm not here by mistake. I did drink. And I drank fast, and I got right at it, and sometimes I can't believe how some people have the stick-to-itiveness to hang in there as long as some of you did. Because I found out in this big book called Alcoholics Anonymous why I drank and what happened to me. It says men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. And then it says they are restless, irritable, and discontented. When I was 16 years of age, I became restless, irritable, and discontented, and I'd never had a drink. I wanted to be an athlete, and I was a good athlete. But all of a sudden, I didn't like the discipline of my home. I didn't like the discipline of my school. I didn't like the discipline of my church. And I became restless, irritable, and discontented with all of that. And I ran away from discipline. And to show you how smart I was in those days, I ran into the Army to get away from discipline. That wasn't one of my smartest moves. And I went downtown the first night I was in the Army. I went downtown with the rest of the men, and I went to a beer parlor, and I had some beer. And I'll tell you, it is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. All of a sudden, I didn't have any of those fears that they've been talking about. I became a great conversationalist. I didn't like what somebody said. All of a sudden, I had muscles, and then I went to a dance, and my God, I was Canada's own Fred Astaire. For the benefit of the young people, he was a good dancer. And it just happened that way. And every night I was down to the beer parlor, and I just started to drink, didn't think there was anything wrong with it. And I drank fast, and I got right at it. Did very well in the Army. That was in 1940, but I got kicked out when I was 17. And I went back home and worked in an aircraft factory and did very well there. But all of a sudden I got some responsibility and I got restless, irritable, and discontented. And I ran once again. And I ran back into the Army. All of the time I was drinking, didn't think there was anything wrong with it. And this time I did very well in the Army because I told them I'd never been in before. And my God, this time I was a genius. And I became an instructor immediately, got recommended for my commission. I would love to stand here and tell you that I was an officer in the Canadian Army, but I got kicked out when I was 18. And I went back home and I worked for a newspaper and did very well in the advertising department, selling advertising. And all of a sudden I got a lot of responsibility and I became restless, irritable, and discontented, and I ran once again. And I ran into the Canadian Navy. And this time I got recommended for my commission, and I'd love to stand here and tell you that I was an officer in the Canadian Navy. But I got kicked out of officers' training. I didn't get kicked out of the Navy, I just got kicked out of officers' training. And seems that an officer didn't appreciate me telling him what to do with his ship. And I was looking at some of those boats on the way up here yesterday, and really it's a physical impossibility to do with that ship. What I told him to do with it. But I stayed in the Navy, and I became a gunner on a merchant ship, Jay, and I sailed all over the world on those merchant packets. And I sailed with many of your people down the South Pacific, and I drank all over the world, and I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. I got married when I was in the Navy, and I'd love to stand here and tell you that I was a good father, a good husband, but I wasn't. I was an alcoholic father, an alcoholic husband, and didn't even realize I was for a long time. I'm still married to the same lady. I've been married to her for 49 years. I know that's not popular in some areas, but I was over in California recently, and I saw a big sign that said, divorce is $65, with buffet $75. I asked Babe if she wanted to stop for lunch, but she said no. And she's a beautiful lady, and I call her Mrs. I Want Money. And her and I get along pretty well. But in that Navy, I had a good time, thought I had a good time. When I came back from the service, I started getting jobs, started losing jobs, didn't think there was anything wrong with it. I kept on drinking, and I started playing gambling, and I was gambling when I was in the service, and I kept on gambling. And the reason I tell you that is because that's one of the reasons I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I came here by way of a poker game. The reason I got here by way of a poker game is that the last 2 years of my drinking, I became a fighter. And I had 17 fights and 17 knockouts, and I lost them all. And I didn't have them in any rings or anything. I just had them in bars and places like that. And the last night that I drank, I was in a poker game and I got caught cheating. And I guess it's okay to get caught cheating or to cheat, but don't ever get caught doing it, especially by the guy that caught me. He weighed 275 pounds. He was a commando in the Canadian Army. And he and I had a fight. Or I should say he had a fight. He hit me and I hit the cement floor, and I got up and he hit me and I hit the cement floor, and we did that just a whole bunch of times. And finally I just stayed down because I couldn't get up. And it makes sense, doesn't it? That's simple enough. And they took me off to hospital. And I was in hospital for 5 days. And not one soul came to visit me. Mrs. I Want Money must have had money. She didn't come. And nobody came. I guess they just didn't know I was there. I like to think that. Thank God that the doctor that was looking after me was a doctor that I'd been in the service with. And the day before I was getting out of hospital, he sat down on the side of my bed and he said, "Cecil, I've done everything I can do for you. I've built you up physically, and there's nothing more I can do for you." He said, "The rest is up to you." And I said, "Well, what do you mean the rest is up to me?" And he said, "Well, I was in the service with you, and you should have been an officer in the Canadian Army, but you fouled that up." And he said, "I believe that you're alcoholic." And he said, You were bad in the Army. Things haven't improved since you got home. Matter of fact, they're worse. And I said, well, what should I do? And he said, I would suggest you join Alcoholics Anonymous. My God, I was only 27 years old. And in 1952, there weren't a whole lot of people 27 years old in Alcoholics Anonymous. But he just walked away and left me. But thank God he didn't leave it at that. I lay there that day thinking about what I should do. And he sent a couple of guys to see me that night. Members of Alcoholics Anonymous. Totally uninvited. I never told them I wanted to see anybody from Alcoholics Anonymous because I didn't. But these two guys came and I knew both of them. I had drank with both of them. And they came in. And I think it's so important to look good when you go to see somebody. Because these two people, they looked good. They were dressed. They didn't have on $700 suits or anything. They just had nice clothes on and they were clean. And that somebody talked about the shiny eyes, and they had shiny eyes. And I knew that something had happened to them. They didn't have to talk because I knew that they had changed. However, they did talk. And they talked loud. And I was in a private ward that I'd given a bad check for. And I tried to change the subject. I would say, how are things downtown? And they didn't even hear me. They just kept on telling me what happened to them and what happened to them in Alcoholics Anonymous. And they left me, but they made me promise that I would be at a meeting the next morning in a restaurant. They had an emergency meeting. They were going to have an emergency meeting for me. There were 15 members in the group at that time in the town I lived in. And they told me they'd have this emergency meeting and they wanted me there. Now, I know why I became an alcoholic. I became an alcoholic because I'm a Protestant. Don't laugh, you Catholics. I lived in a little town. I was born in a little town, now listen to this, called St. Louis. And the river comes down from up there, and the fur traders came down, and the river, Saskatchewan River, joined on with the Mississippi, and that's how St. Louis down here was born. A fur trader started the St. Louis Hide and Fur Company. I know you don't know whether that's true, and I'm not going to tell you whether it is or not. But in this little town, it was predominantly Catholic, and very few Protestant people lived there. And I was one of them, and they treated me bad. They called the bingos in Latin, so I couldn't understand them. And they just were mean to me. And in those days, I remember going to midnight mass with some of my buddies and getting home. And I lived with my grandfather, and I got home real late. You know how long mass lasts. And he said, where were you, my boy? And I said, went to midnight mass. And he was a heavy Protestant. And I never went to midnight mass again. I haven't since. Because that wasn't really the thing to do if you were a Protestant. And here I am in a Catholic hospital with a bad check. And that little nun couldn't find a place to deposit this check. And she was a little narrow about that. And it was before Medicare. Medicare didn't come until 10 years later. And she wanted her money before I got out of that hospital. Just because I was Protestant, I know that. And I phoned the only person the next morning that I knew that my credit was good with, and that was my bootlegger. He was a taxi driver, and he came and got me out of hospital, paid my bill, and took me to this meeting. And I wish you could have seen me that morning. I've always liked nice clothes. Still like nice clothes, but today I pay for them. And that morning my shirt was torn and it was all covered with blood. My jacket was torn and it was cold outside, and I had my overcoat collar up, and I went to this little restaurant, and the entire group showed up. And they had a meeting. I knew every one of them. And they all treated me good. My God, I just really loved what they had to say. And they were having a meeting that night, and I said I'd be there. And then one of them said they would drive me home. And I said, no, I can get home okay. But they insisted, and I didn't want them to come home because sometimes I'd been away before for 3 or 4 days. And Mrs. I Want Money was very narrow about those things. And if someone took me home, she'd run them off. And I thought, my God, I found some really good friends now, and I don't want them to, her to upset things for me. But this was before Al-Anon came into Prince Albert. I mean, Al-Anon was very, very young in those days. But some of the ladies, they'd been planning this. A whole bunch of people downtown had been planning this, not to come and visit me and everything. And so some of the ladies whose husbands belonged to AA, there weren't any ladies in AA in Prince Albert at that time. But some of them had been up to see my good lady Babe, and they told her what I was going to try to do. And I walked into that house, and I was scared. My God, I was scared because she was always mean when I came home. And so she kissed me. And she said, I think everything is going to be okay, hon. And if nothing else, that kept me in Alcoholics Anonymous for that day because she had changed already. I said, this is a good thing. And we went to a meeting that night. And we went to a meeting, and it was a mixed meeting because the ladies used to go on Saturday nights, the wives. And they had a social first. And I remember they were playing games, and they were all old people. My God, they were 40, 45, 50 years old. And I thought, what in the heck have I got myself into, And then I remember they played Pin the Tail on the Donkey. And that really wasn't my idea of a Saturday night, I'll tell you, And then I noticed that everybody, including Babe, were having a great time. Everybody was laughing and just having a good time except me. But finally I got into the swing of things, and after that they had a meeting, and some guy, some old-timer, he said that he was sober 1 year. And I sat in the back and I thought, liar. I knew this guy, and I just knew that there's no way that guy stayed sober for a year. But that's the way I was thinking. Actually, he had stayed sober for a year. And I knew he's a traveling man, and I knew he went out on the road and drank during the week, or this is what I was thinking, and then came back and told these donkeys that he was sober. I had him figured out. And then a couple of old-timers who were sober about 18 months, they took me in the other room and after the meeting, and they said, see, they used to say in those days there's no musts in Alcoholics Anonymous. And they said, see, you heard tonight there's no musts in AA. But they said, tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, there's a breakfast meeting here, and you must be here. And they used to change things like that, contradict themselves. And this Alcoholics Anonymous hasn't changed. We still do. We say strange things to people and then contradict ourselves the next deal. And so I went the next morning. And another guy said something to me that's been very important in my life. His name was Bob Motherwell, and Bobby's gone to that great Roundup up top. And Bobby put his arm around me and he said, Cecil, we have 2 meetings a week. He said, why don't you make a decision that you're going to go to 2 meetings a week? And then you don't have to make a decision every meeting. That makes sense. So I thought, well, these guys, they're instructing me what to do. I said, fine, I'm going to do that. That's the best decision I ever made in my life because I've never stopped going. Just go to 2 meetings a week, sometimes more than that, but I go to my 2 meetings a week at my home group. I've never stopped doing it. And I'll be always grateful for Bobby for doing that. Bobby said something else to me that night that made me feel good. He said, Cecil, we want you, and we need you, and we love you. I didn't think that anybody wanted me. I didn't think anybody needed me. And Babe had informed me that nobody loved me. And so, that meant a whole lot to me. And all of these years I have tried to make people comfortable at meetings because I think it's so important. You see, we are having no trouble getting people into Alcoholics Anonymous today. We're having trouble keeping them. And it's up to us to make them feel comfortable. I mean, there's more people leaving AA today than there are staying. That seems ridiculous, isn't it? But it's true. Because we aren't making them feel comfortable. I mean, in those days, after the meeting, we had the coffee in the club rooms. Now, I know the reason: we couldn't afford to go to the restaurants, probably. But we stayed in the club room and had a meeting after the meeting and drank the coffee that was left over for free. We didn't go to the restaurant and spend our money. We put it in the bucket and tried to pay the rent. And, you know, we had some of the best meetings after the meeting. And I don't see it happening anymore. Now, I know when I'm finished, you're probably going to say, well, you know, that's the way it used to be. It's not that way anymore. But we were pretty successful. We kept people sober. We knew who belonged to our group, and we looked after them. That's not happening anymore. A lot of people don't know who belongs to their group, and that's a sad thing. Well, they say our group's pretty big. Well, it's pretty big if you just have an hour meeting or an hour and a half meeting and I'll say amen and I'm gone, and you don't stay around. A lot of people don't realize that it says Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship. I go to my meetings sometimes 3/4 of an hour before the meeting, and I spend time with people. I try to get my sponsees to do that. Either go to the meeting early and stay late, whichever they prefer. And I find out it works. I find out that we know everybody in our group. And that's a fabulous thing. Now, I'm probably talking to the wrong people. Probably in this area you do exactly that. But I'm talking some areas I go to that's not so. So I hope you do it here. And I had a good time in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was the youngest member in the province of Saskatchewan. The province of Saskatchewan, Chink, I want you to know, is about 3 times the size of Texas, where you were born. Just thought I'd throw that in. And we had a good time. And we went to a lot of places and had little deals, not nearly as big as this, but small roundups at that time. And we had a good time. And wherever I went, people used to pat me on the back and say, "You're doing a good job, kid." Boy, oh boy, I was getting what I was looking for all of my life, someone to make me feel good. And then a horrible thing happened in our group. Some younger members came in. And they walked right by me and talked to the older members, and the older members walked right by me and talked to the younger members. And all of a sudden, I had become a middle member. And I don't care whether you're an Al-Anon, Alcoholics Anonymous, or Alateen, one day you're going to become a middle member. And it's a bad thing. It's just like being a hole in a donut. You're nothing, you know. Nobody talks to you, and you're standing out there. And I believe that's why a lot of people are leaving Alcoholics Anonymous, because they become middle members and they don't know what to do. Well, I was fortunate. I thought, well, maybe if I go out and do what I used to do, like practice, and then come back in, I'll get the same treatment. Fortunately, I didn't have to do that. Because we had a guy in our group, and we have discussion meetings where I come from, and we had a guy by the name of Ernie Sear, and we asked Ernie to chair our meetings for 3 months. And Ernie said something that was the greatest thing that was ever happened in my life. Ernie said, "I will chair the meetings providing we do something. Not study it, but do it." He said, "I want this group to take the steps and do them as a group. Not talk about them, not study them and tell everybody else how to do them when you haven't done them yourself, but do them." So we thought we'd humor old Ernie along and do what he wanted to do, and so we said, that's fine. And that's what I want to share with you tonight. The experience I've had since coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. We went to the first meeting, and Ernie gave us our homework. Told us, every one of us, to go home and read the first 57 pages, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I had read the first 57 pages of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. But this time, I figured, well, Ernie must be going to give us an exam or something. So I really read them. And I would phone my sponsor. I've had the same sponsor for 40 years. Dear old Elmer. Sober 10 days longer than me. Actually, we're sober in days the same amount of time, because when they had a party for us last January, and they mentioned the days that we were sober, and Elmer had neglected to count the leap years. So I caught up to him. But I'd phone Elmer and I'd say, you doing your reading? Yeah, I'm getting right at it. And we were really serious about this thing, and everybody was. We'd phone each other, and how are you coming to reading? I'm getting at it, but boy, I hope the questions aren't going to be too tough. I'm not really good at this, And it was easy to read some of those smutty books that we used to read, but to read that book, it wasn't that easy. And to know about it, what was going to happen, suppose they asked us some questions. But Ernie didn't ask us any questions. He just said, okay, this week we're going to take step 1, where we admitted we're powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. I didn't know there was a second part to that step. I just thought I was powerless over alcohol. I didn't realize that I had an unmanageable life. I just thought if I quit drinking, everything would be all right. Babe told me that. If you'd only stop drinking, everything would be okay. She told me lies. But she thought that. She thought everything would be all right. But I had an unmanageable life. I had an unmanageable life as far as money is concerned. Now, I know none of you'll even know what I'm talking about down here, but back home, I had this unmanageable life. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous owing $6,200. And I know that's not a great sum of money to you people, but that was 1952. Figure it up. Probably $35,000 today. And I didn't owe it for anything. I just owed it. I came through here by way of a poker game. Some people were bad people that I owed it to. And my boss took me to a bank, made me give he and the bank manager a list of all the people that we owed money to, or that I owed money to. And he made Babe and I sign a note that we would pay cash for everything. And they sent, I don't know why they did it this way, but he and the bank manager sent the checks out to everybody. They didn't let me do that. And he endorsed my note for $6,200, and they paid everybody off. Made me sign a paper, made Babe and I sign a paper that we'd pay cash for everything. 3 years later, he bailed us out for $7,500. You see, I had an unmanageable life as far as money is concerned. And then I found out that that's got nothing to do, that financial problems got nothing to do with money. It just has a lot to do with big shot-ism, has a lot to do with pride, has a lot to do with ego. Now, I know you don't even know what I'm talking about, financial problems. But maybe someday you'll sponsor somebody that's got some financial problems. You say, by golly, I heard a guy from Canada talk about that. And you maybe get my tape out and play it to him. And I want to tell you, I want to show you that I've changed a little bit. A lot of years ago, I owed a manufacturer $10,000. Now, that's not a lot of money in my business because I'm in the fur coat business. But it's a lot of money in the middle of July when it's about 96 above. And this man was writing me letters, phoning me, and saying bad things, and finally I decided I better answer his letter. And I wrote him a letter, told him I liked his merchandise, I'd like to pick some fall dating on it. And then I threw a little philosophy at him. I said, if I had 10 miles to walk down a railroad track, it'd take me a long time. But if I took it a telephone pole at a time, it'd take a little longer, but I'd finally get there. And then I signed it, yours truly, Cecil E. Corgle, manager, Cecil Corgle Furs and Fashions. P.S. I'm enclosing a certified check for $100. And I sent it away. 4 or 5 days later, I got a letter back. That's when the post office was operating properly. And this man said that he congratulated me on my letter writing ability, suggested that I get out of the fur business and go writing letters for somebody. And he signed it, yours truly, Mo Amsel, Montreal. P.S. Would you mind sending me another telephone pole? I've sent him a lot of telephone poles. And I learned that I didn't have too much pride to say I can't pay you $10,000 today. And I got all of my financial problems looked after that way. If any of you should ever hear about people who's got financial problems, whether they be in Al-Anon, Alateen, or Alcoholics Anonymous, tell them to try to get them straightened out, because it's a bad thing. I can remember when Babe got into Al-Anon. And I can remember coming home, and by this time I had become an eye specialist. You know, I know this, and I can do this. And I came home, and I'm having lunch with my two daughters and with Babe, and Babe said, I thought you said you paid so-and-so. And I said, if I said I paid him, I paid him, you know. She said, well, why would they phone me this morning and say you hadn't paid him? You know what the great member of Alcoholics Anonymous, people talk about an unmanageable life drunk. I want you to know I had one sober. I had an unmanageable life sober. And you know what the great member of Alcoholics Anonymous did? Took my food, plate and all, threw it right over my wife's head into the sink, broke the plate, got up, removed the telephone from the wall, and said, they'll not be phoning you anymore. And I became restless, irritable, and discontented. So, went in the front room and pouted. Isn't that something for a way of now a member of Alcoholics? Now, I know none of you'd ever do that, but I did that. And I found out what an unmanageable life was really. I had many other things wrong with me, but I found that was something that was causing me a lot of problems. I didn't quit gambling because I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I just thought I could be a better gambler. I'll let you in another secret. You can lose money sober. Happens. And it can get you in financial problems. We went on to step 2 the next week, where it said, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And I said to some of the old-timers, I said, how can I come back from somewhere I haven't been? I've never been insane. And they said, Cecil, that's not what it means. It means you are a negative thinker. Your thinking is wrong. And they said, you know, that's what's wrong with you. And I was that type of guy. I was the type of guy that could sit around trying to help somebody that wasn't there. Do you ever see, I know you wouldn't do that here, but other areas I've seen this happen. We sit around having coffee, or even at a house or in a restaurant, trying to help somebody that's not there, and they say things like, have you heard? Did you know? Oh, I think it's awful. And that's the kind of person I was. And I was real negative. I was something like the negative barber. Guy slid into the barber chair one time and he said, like a haircut lasted for 3 weeks. Barber said, why 3 weeks? Well, he said, I'm going on vacation. Barber said, where are you going on vacation? He said, first of all, I'm going to London, England. Barber says, you're not going to London, England. He said, I am. He said, you're not. He said, I am. He said, I wouldn't go there if I were you. Now, I've never been there, but I heard. It's a lousy place to go, too many people, too many cars. The guy said, I don't care. If I don't like it there, I'm going on to Paris. Barber says, you're not going to Paris. He said, I am. He said, you're not. He said, I am. He said, I wouldn't go there if I were you. He said, no, I've never been there, but I heard. He said, they really fleece the tourists. Barber said, guy said, look, it just cut my hair. If I don't like it there, I'm going to Rome. The barber says, you're not going to Rome. He said, I am. He said, you're not. He said, I am. He said, I wouldn't go there if I were you. He said, a lot of Catholics over there. Guy said, I don't care, I'm a Catholic. Yeah, but he said, I heard a different kind of a Catholic over there. 3 weeks later, the guy come back, slid into the barber chair. The barber said, how was your trip? He said, it was good. He said, it wasn't. He said, it was. He said, you didn't go to London. He said, I did. He said, you didn't. He said, I did. Loved to have stayed there long, but I wanted to get on to Paris. He says, you didn't go to Paris. He said, I did. He says, you didn't. He says, I did. Loved to have stayed there long, but I wanted to get on to Rome. And he says, you didn't go to Rome. And he says, I did. He says, you didn't. He says, I did. He said, you'll never believe what happened. He says, I got an audience with the Pope. And he says, you didn't. He said, I did. He says, you didn't. He said, and you'll never believe what happened. He says, I knelt down to kiss the Pope's ring, and you'll never believe what the Pope said. And the barber says, what? And he says, where in the heck did you get that lousy haircut? And I was something like a negative barber. I didn't know, but I'd heard, But something great happened to me at that time. I was sober about 9 months. And we were playing ball, and we'd won the provincial championship. And we were down at the Army Navy Veterans. That's who we were playing ball for. And they were our sponsor. And my brother-in-law, who was playing on the team, he said, "Old Van wants to talk to you." Old Van was a man 65 years old. And he drank a lot of wine. And he'd come into the Army Navy. He was an old veteran of the First War. And he'd come in and have a few beer and go out and drink some more wine. He'd been drunk for days. And he said, "Cecil, how did you stop drinking?" And I said, "I joined Alcoholics Anonymous." Nobody had ever asked me this. And all of a sudden, I had my first pigeon. And Van says, "Tell me about it." And I said, "Well, I can't tell you here." I said, "Let's go home." He didn't live very far from there. I took him home. And old Van was so sick from drinking that he couldn't sit down and he couldn't lie down. And I took Van and I stayed with him all night. I walked with him. I talked with him. I told him everything that Alcoholics Anonymous had told me. Many of the things I didn't believe them, but I told it to Van. And you know what? That next morning, about 6 o'clock, old Van was looking better. And he was sober. And he never asked for a drink. And old Van died 20 years later, still sober. First guy that I ever sponsored. And, just by telling them things, and I told them all about God, and I wasn't so sure that I believed all of that they told me, but I told it to Van, and Van got sober. And so the second step really, really wasn't tough for me, because I came to believe in God, believe me. And we went on to that third step where it told us to make a decision, to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. And in step 3, that's all it asks us to do, is make that decision. And we did step 3 the week after we did step 2. And that made sense to me. 3 comes after 2, It made a lot of sense to me. So we did step 3, and they asked me to make that decision. And I don't like making decisions still today. You watch people when they're picking up their gift here tonight. Tough time, some of them, deciding which book they wanted. We still hate making the decisions for fear we'll make the wrong decision, Tonight before coming up here, I was trying to decide whether I should go to the bathroom or not. And right now, I don't know whether I've made the right decision. I heard a story about an old poacher that he did everything wrong. You know what poachers are? We have them back in Canada. They go hunting out of season, fishing out of season. And this old poacher, he had done this for years, and nobody could ever catch him. And a new game warden came to town, and he heard about this old guy, and he went down and made friends with him. And they were sitting talking. The old game warden was dressed in old clothes, and about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the old poacher said, "Well, I'm going fishing." And the game warden, who he didn't know was a game warden, said, "Like, come with you." So they went out in the middle of the stream, and the old poacher stopped the boat, reached over and opened a tin box, pulled out 2 sticks of dynamite. He lit them, threw them in the drink, and boom! Up comes the fish, out comes the net. He starts loading them in the boat, out comes the badge, and the old game warden said, "We finally got you." And he's giving the old poacher a lecture, and the old poacher doesn't bat an eye. He reached over, got 2 more sticks of dynamite, lit them, handed them over to the game warden. And the game warden sitting there with 2 lit sticks of dynamite. And the old poacher says, "Look it, buddy, do you want to talk or do you want to fish?" He made a decision, So sometimes we have a difficult time making decisions because we're afraid of making the wrong one. I had a friend of mine that was over in Ireland, and he was going down the street, and someone stuck a gun in his back and said, "What are you?" And he thought real fast. He thought, well, if I say I'm Catholic and he's Protestant, he's going to shoot me. If I say I'm Protestant and he's Catholic, he's going to shoot me. So he said, "I'm Jewish." And the guy with the gun says, "I'm the luckiest Arab in the whole wide world." See, sometimes we make the wrong decision, you see. And so here I am trying to make a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood Him. And I went downstairs and I said, You know, I had an unmanageable life. I found a manager in step 2, and I had a talk with this manager. I'm going to let you handle things. I'm not doing a good job. I had to keep it that simple. Because, you see, I found out in Alcoholics Anonymous I have to keep things simple. I have to do that because if I don't, I foul them up. I heard a story about a friend of mine back home that had a ranch. And another friend of mine said, "How did you get the name of this ranch?" And he says, "Well, I wanted to call it the Bar Q. My wife wanted to call it Susie Q. My son wanted to call it Bar Susie Q. And my daughter wanted to call it Susie Bar Q. So we called it the Bar Q, Susie Q, Susie Bar Q, Bar Susie Q." And the guy said, "Well, that's a good name, but where are the cattle?" And he said, "None of them ever survived the branding, you know." So you see, that may happen to us. We may not survive the branding if we foul it up. I just keep things real simple. Some of my group insisted that I write a book because all AAs that's been around for a while are writing books, it seems. And so they were after me to write a book. They said, "All your experiences, put them down and everything." And they kept at me. And finally, I got it written. It's not conference approved as yet, but I got it written. It's called The Daily Spiritual Guide book. And the first page says, "Get up and pray." The second page says, "Get dressed." Third page says, "Don't drink and go to meetings." Fourth page says, "Do the steps in sequence." Fifth page says, now this is a dilly. It says, "Get a job." And the next page says, "Help someone else." And the last page says, "Pray and go to bed." Now, that's not bad, eh? My God. Actually quite proud of it myself, you know. Pat myself on the back once in a while. Been such a genius. I took that third step. And the next week, Ernie come along and he had pencils and paper for all of us. And he gave us pencils and paper. He said, "The reason I'm doing this," he said, "I've heard people say they can't find a pencil and a paper. And they have a difficult time with step 4. And so he explained step 4 right out of this big book called Alcoholics Anonymous. Took us to page 65, showed us a chart, showed us exactly what we had to do. And it seems funny that step should be in how it works on page 65. And it told me, exactly, told me everything what to do. And I went home and did it. Phoned all of the other guys and saying, "How do you come in with step 4? Everybody was doing step 4, the whole book. See, we weren't doing a step study book group. We had a step do it group. There's a difference. Because a lot of people do step studies. But this old Ernie, we didn't know there was such a thing as step study. He told us we were having a step do it group. And we didn't want, Elmer, he's not that swift, but he was my sponsor, and he seemed to be doing this, and I didn't want him to get ahead of me. So I was doing it, and I wrote her down, and next week I went. As a matter of fact, I asked Ernie if he wanted to look at it, and he said, no, never mind. He said, "We'll tell you what to do with that tonight." And we went into step 5. We admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And we went home, and Ernie made appointments with different ministers for us to do it. Now, I know down here a lot of people do it with their sponsor. But in this book that I bought in the United States, and I was written in the United States, and I would like to share with you what it said in my book that I got from the United States. It says, "Rightly and naturally, we think well before we choose the person or persons with whom to take this intimate and confidential step. Those of us belonging to a religious denomination which requires confession must, and of course will want to go to the properly appointed authority, whose duty it is to receive it. Though we have no religious connections, we may still do well to talk with someone ordained by an established religion. We often find such a person quick to see and understand our problems." Now, that's what it tells me in that book. So I went to a Protestant minister. Not a Catholic priest, but a Protestant minister. And he was a nice little fellow, and he shared some things with me. He was kind of a orangutan too, and he and I became pretty good friends. He didn't stay preaching after that. He joined the parole service or something, went working elsewhere. But we had a good session, and I was friends with that man until the day he passed away. But step 5 says, admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being. And a lot of people say that I went to talk to another human being. Step 5 says, admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being. And what I had to do was get down on my knees, admit it to God, but my step 4. Then I had to get up and look in the mirror and admit it to me. And you know what? I was at that time capable of changing stories from there to there. I had to do that a few times. And then I went and talked to another human being. And this human being back home, we've always had step seminars, 5th-step seminars for ministers and priests in our hometown, so that they know what they're doing when we call on them. And this Reverend Kasler said to me, do you know what to do now when I finish step 5 with him? And I said, yes, I have to take this book and find a place and read step 6 and 7. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character and humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. Now you see, when we take that inventory, an inventory shouldn't be difficult for anybody to take, because we're always taking inventories. Some people say we're just trying to help somebody, but it's really taking inventories of other people. And when we go to take our own, Ernie said, get right in there and take a good inventory. And you see, some people don't want to do that, take a good inventory. I heard a story about a dear old lady that went to a doctor. And the doctor said, what's the trouble? And she said, well, there's really no trouble. She said, I just have gas on my stomach. But she said, it's not causing me any trouble. There's no noise or there's no odor. But she said, it kind of scares me sometimes. And she said, I'd like to check it out with you. So he gave her some tablets. And the next week she came back and she said, she said, now it's really bad. She said, it's got odor, but still no noise. And so he wrote out another prescription. And he says, now that we've done something about your sinuses, we'll see if we can do something about your ears. And so we have to get into the nitty-gritty and admit what's wrong. Some of us don't do that. And so we went on to that step 6. That is kind of funny, isn't it? God, it must have caused her a lot of apprehension. So anyway, in step 6, where it says we're entirely ready to have God remove all His defects of character, step 7 says humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. A lot of people sit around having meetings, we used to do this, trying to figure out the difference between shortcomings and defects of character. Entirely ready to have God remove all His defects of character. And did you ever see them have a 2-hour meeting, go home and not know the difference and still have them, and not know how to get rid of them? Well, it says be entirely ready to have God remove all His defects of character, and humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. Now, I don't know whether this is so, but this is the way I do it. I think that humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings, and entirely ready to have God remove all His defects of character. I think the defects of character, for me, is doing something I'm not supposed to do. And I think that shortcomings is not doing something that I'm supposed to do. Now, I just share this with you. This is just, I'm not saying this is gospel truth. I'm sharing my experience with you. You know, that we do a lot of things that we're not supposed to do. And you know, the girls today talked about not being perfect. And that's right. We never will be. But it's all right to try to be. And like, entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. Well, we know what our defects of character are. And then humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. We can get pretty important in Alcoholics Anonymous. And we can become eye specialists. And we can forget little things like holding the door for our sweet lady. I never forget it. I forgot it once. Mrs. I Want Money just stood there. Instead of you driving off by yourself, Get over here and open this door. And I'm glad she thinks that way. Because I was all caught up with cease and forgot to hold the door. Now this is a little girl that I used to walk several miles to see. Because I didn't have a car then. And here I am in this big automobile, leaving her stand out in the cold without opening the door. Now, I know all down here you all do that, but I'm sharing what I didn't do. And I don't think it was right. But there's a lot of things that we don't do. My grandmother taught me little things like, please, excuse me, thank you. Do you ever say to your husband say, or wives say, or whatever, pass the sugar? My grandmother used to say, will you please pass the sugar? That's how I said it. Through alcoholism, I quit doing it. But I married a girl who didn't quit doing it. And I still kept doing it when I got into Alcoholics Anonymous and started taking steps 6 and 7. It says, humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. I had a difficult time with this humility. And I heard Arbutus say, an Al-Anon lady, and God bless him, she said that if there was any definition of humility, it would be the ability to stand and the willingness to kneel. The ability to stand up for what we believe in, and the willingness to kneel, to get on our knees and thank God for what we have. And I don't know whether that's is or whether it isn't. I just took it. And thank God I can do that. And I can get down on my knees. As I had a difficult time getting down on my knees. And I heard a man in New York one time by the name of Shai Walker from Chicago. And Shai told a story about how he couldn't get down on his knees. He told a story about coming out of prison, and he told a story about how he wanted to stay sober, and he told a story about how he couldn't pray. And he told a story about how one night he came home, and quite by accident he kicked his high-top boots underneath the bed. And he told the story about how the next morning he got down on his knees to get his high-top boots from under the bed. And he thought, by golly, seeing him down here, I'm going to say a few words. And he used to do that every night, boot his boots under the bed. So the next morning he'd have to get down and get him, and he'd say a few words. I don't know whether it works with high-top boots, but I know it works with ordinary shoes because I tried it. Today I don't have to do that. I'm probably one of the prayingest members in Alcoholics Anonymous because I've got a lot to pray about and say thank you about. And to ask for guidance and ask for help and ask for help for somebody else the way it tells me to do in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I talk about step 6 and 7 a whole lot. Because you see, I think that everybody talks so much about step 4 and 5 that they forget to talk about step 6, 7, 8, and 9, which is the steps that clear away the wreckage of the past. And steps 6 and 7 is so important to me. And we went on to step 8 the next week. And it told us that we had to make another list. To make a list of all the people we'd harmed and become willing to make amends to them all. And I said to Ernie, I wrote that down in step 4. And he said, knowing you, Corgle, you probably hurt somebody between step 4 and step 8. And I probably had. And so I made another list. And then in step 9 it told me that I had to make amends. To make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. And you see, Ernie used to tell us, he would read the promises to us every meeting. And he said, this is what you're entitled to. Don't gyp yourselves. Get what's coming to you in Alcoholics Anonymous. He used to say, I know that everybody, when they were drinking, got what was coming to them. So do it in Alcoholics Anonymous. Get what's coming to you. And he'd read these promises to us every meeting and tell us that that's what we're entitled to, those 12 promises. Thank God for Ernie, because he just taught me so much. And he taught so many people in that group so much. And we did those steps. And I can remember Ernie telling us in step 9, he said, now if you'll do what this book tells us to do, not what Ernie told us to do, he said, what this book tells us to do, you will never have to go back and do those steps again. Because he said step 10, 11, and 12 teaches us how to live. And so we went into step 10, which says continue to take inventory, personal inventory. And when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. And I didn't think that sounded so important. But each and every day and each and every night, I take an inventory before I go to bed. And when I do something wrong, I try to straighten it out, like right now. Did you ever have an argument before you went to work with those people that live at your house? And you go to work driving like an idiot, and then you get in there and you tell somebody about it at coffee time. And you make the story just a little bit worse in your favor. And then at lunchtime you sit and talk to somebody and you say, I don't know what's going to happen at that house of mine, and you make it just a little bit worse again, and you drive the old knife into them a little bit more. In the afternoon you have coffee with somebody, and if you get somebody's ear in between coffee and noon, you tell them about it. And they must think you're crazy to live at a house like that. You know, why would people want to live at a house like that? 5 o'clock, you go home. And you have to go into that house that you've been talking about all day long because you live there. Wouldn't it have been nice to apologize in the morning and then come back in and walk in there like as if it's okay, even if you do pay the mortgage, to live there? You know? See, step 10 is very, very important to me. Because when I was 10 years sober, and I share this with the 10-year people, I forgot who I was, what I was, and where I came from. And all of a sudden I became Mr. AA. I was a past delegate. Boy, oh boy, had a big job, had an expense account, drove a big company car, was on radio and doing my own commercials for the company I was working for, and oh boy, I was big. And I was working for the largest ladies' wear store in the province of Saskatchewan. And I was looking after the fur department for 5 stores. And one day, and I was working for the wealthiest man in the city of Prince Albert, and I decided that he should be the second wealthiest man. And I got some of those material things, but I lost a whole lot of spiritual things. And one day Alec called me into the office, and it seemed that the store wasn't quite big enough for the 2 of us. And it seemed that he owned the store. And he fired the great one. And now I want you to know that I was going to AA meetings. Never missed a meeting. But I'd walk in with an attitude something like this. Boy, they're lucky that the great one comes to this meeting. You know, some of you people want a little counseling after, maybe give you a few minutes of my time. I went out to the penitentiary every Tuesday night to speak to those lucky people. Drove out in that big automobile and thinking on the way out, whew, are these guys lucky to have the great one come out every week. And all of a sudden I'm fired. And I walked out of that store with an attitude something like this. They won't last long now. The great one's gone. I want you to know they're still there, and they're still okay, and they're still millionaires, and they're doing all right without the great one. About that time, I had a little cousin who was in Alcoholics Anonymous. She lived in Vancouver, British Columbia, and she came home. And I was going to a Roundup something like this, about 600 miles away. And I went down to say goodbye to Fern, and I was all dressed up in new threads, and I stood up in front of her in my big egotistical way, and I said, "Well, kid, how do I look?" And Fern said these simple words to me, and I hope that they'll help you as much as they helped me. She said, "You look real good on the outside, Cecil. How are you really on the inside?" And I drove off with dear old Dave Murray, who's now gone to that great Roundup, and Dave was with me when Fern said that, and he didn't talk to me. He just thought that maybe what Fern said would get through to me. And I went into Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I spent a couple of days with my big book and with God in the hotel room. And I went back to Prince Albert, and I went in business for myself. That's not important. I had to do something. But I went back to AA. Never gone away from AA, but I went back to AA with the proper attitude, because that little gal said it to me. Thank God for her. Step 11 said, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Each and every day, no matter where I am, I have a quiet time. I get up early in the morning and I read page 86, 87, and 88, which is the 11th step. I read the prayer on page 63. And I read the prayer on page 76. And I read the promises, page 83 and 84. I read the last part of A Vision for You, page 164. And I read acceptance on page 449. And I read all of the acceptance from 449 right through to 451, I think it is. And I have some meditation. I read other things. I may read Vincent Peale. I may read Emmett Fox. I may read the Bible. I know it's not conference approved, but I'll take a chance. You know? And I do that before I go to work. Some people say, what time do you get up? I call it 7 minutes with God. Sometimes I take longer than that. And you see, I know that somebody's going to aggravate my disease that day, somewhere. Before I get out of the house, Mrs. I Want Money will aggravate my disease. I know it. I try to sneak out. She catches me. She says, I have to have my hair done today. Do you have any money? Do you know what I do with Mrs. I Want Money? I kiss her, tell her that I love her, and I run for the door and I'm gone. Sometimes she's still standing there at 5 o'clock. Doesn't know what happened to her, you know. But I just don't give her any money, because she's got money. She doesn't need my money. And then you drive off to work. But, you know, some people, if you don't do that, they drive off to work and, you know, they think all accidents are caused by drunk drivers. They're not. They're caused by someone having an argument before they go to work. And they're mad. And I don't do that. I go to my store and I sit there and I greet my staff the way I want them to greet my customers. You see, the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous says our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends on AA unity. That doesn't mean unity just in AA. That means unity forever, in our home, in our church, in our business. And so I do it that way. And my staff, you know, work with me and not for me. I'm not too interested in material things, but I want you to know I phoned my store 3 times a day and they had a good day without me. And I'm grateful for that. And I want to share something that happened when I was doing my reading one morning. I told you we had 2 daughters. Our oldest daughter, we gave her everything possible. We gave her love, we gave her education, material things. And you'll never believe what she did. She married a Catholic. An Italian one. They're the worst kind. And they had this beautiful little girl. I don't know how she's so beautiful, because she's part Italian. But I was down east just outside of Toronto where they lived, and I was coming from some place like this, and I went by, and her name was Anna Louisa, I'm short. And she was ready to come home with me, and I took her home. She was 3 years old. And we went home in the airplane together, and the next morning she was knocking at the door when I was doing my reading, and Babe said, honey, you can't go in there. Gramps is doing his reading. So she said, well, I want to tell him something. So I said, let her come in, and she came in and took her up on my knee, and she's a beautiful little girl. And I said, explain to her what I was trying to do, and I said, what did you want to tell me? And she said, I wanted to tell you that I love you. Now, that may not mean anything to anybody. But here is a guy that sobered up a hard rock at 27 years old, unable to give love, unable to accept love, and here a little Catholic girl's telling me she loves me, and I'm telling her I love her too, you know? And she's 22 years old today. And I phoned her, she's going to university, and no matter when Anna and I see each other, we tell each other that we love each other. And we don't care who's around, we just say we love each other, and when we part, we say we love each other. Fantastic. All because of Alcoholics Anonymous. She has a sister, her name is Cella Maria. Really not an Anglo-Saxon name. She too goes to university, and oh boy, she's a great girl. She's just spends money like crazy, and wears all of the latest fashions, drives the nicest cars, and just a great gal. And she believes anything that Grandpa says is the gospel truth. And her mother really gets upset about this sometimes, but I haven't told her any difference. Why? I mean, the girl's happy this way. Why not? You know? And she's a great gal. They have a cousin by the name of Jason. Jason is a Protestant. And he's 19 years old, goes to university, works for me in between, and he is quite a performer, I'll tell you. He was voted the best Sea Cadet in Saskatchewan, and this year he got the award for the best Sea Cadet in all of Canada. And he's going to get a commission in the Navy. And I said, don't be telling somebody what to do with a ship. Just take the commission, you know. And next week, of course, with Remembrance Day, which is next Wednesday, he'll be leading the parade with the Sea Cadets home, and he had long hair. And his mother was just going wild about this hair. And I tried to tell her, it's only hair, you know, Donna, don't be concerned about it. But she was concerned about it, and she got everybody concerned about it. And Jason is something like me. He gets restless, irritable, discontented. He doesn't drink that much, but he gets restless, irritable, discontented. And he just let that hair grow. When it come time to go to cadets, he did this and put the hat on, and everything looked all right. And he never had to do hats off or anything, so because he was in charge of the group, and so. Anyway, his mother gave him $30. Said she'd give him $30 last week if he'd cut his hair. He phoned Mrs. I want money, and he said, Donna, my mother's given me $30 to cut my hair. Do you want to get in on the bid? And so Babe said, I'll give $30, and he caught me for $50, and he caught his aunt but he got about $400. And there was a group of young fellows taking up a collection to try to get him not to cut his hair. But what happened was we beat them to it, and yesterday Jason had his hair cut. And I phoned him today, and I phoned my store, and everybody is so happy. And Jason, I don't know whether it's such a great thing or not, but I think I'll be happy too because I paid $50. I should be happy. But he's been to a whole pile of AA deals with me. He's been to 2 international conferences. He's been to Los Angeles, New York. He was down to New Orleans. He was down in Montreal with me. Not because he's a Protestant. He just likes to come along with me, you know. And we just had a great time. And we have a tremendous relationship. And I know I'm going to be proud when I see him in that officer's uniform. Then Donna got divorced from Jason's dad, and she too married a Catholic, and another Italian. And they have a little guy, and his name is, oh my God, Giovanni Anthony. And he's my pal. And from when he was 2 years old, he would look in magazines and he'd say, he'd look at a whiskey bottle and he'd say, Papa Cecil and Gio, no way. Look at cigarettes. He'd say, Papa Cecil and Gio, no way. I say Gio because I can't say Giovanni. And then he went to an Italian wedding and he came home and his mother and dad says, tell Papa Cecil what you drank down east at the wedding. And he changed the subject. He was 4 years old. And finally they made him admit it. And he said, Papa Cecil, I just had a little bit of wine. But he hasn't had another slip. That's the last one. He's 8 years old. He's doing all right. And there's a guy over in Chicago that's big in cards, baseball cards and everything. And he's Italian, and boy, oh boy, he supplies Gio. I mean, this guy's big in cards. Gio is practically a wealthy man now. He gets cards from this guy every time that I go through Chicago, and the guy came to Prince Albert to our Roundup. Incidentally, our Roundup's the last complete weekend in May. And although we get too many people now, you people have been so nice to me, it's okay if you come. And I'm not supposed to tell anybody about it, but it's okay if you come. And Bill came up and brought Gio a bunch of cards, and he sends Gio cards for Christmas, and told the last bunch of cards that he gave him was, he told me to put them in a safety deposit box for him and not let him touch them until he's 18 years old in university, and he'll be all right. And Gio thinks like we're going down the street, and I introduce him to my AA friends, and I say, this is a pal of mine. And if I don't say it's a pal, Gio pulls my head down and he said, do they belong to AA? And I said, no. And he said, come on, let's go. You know, he wants no fooling around with all these people. And it really upsets his mom and dad. It upsets a lot of people that drink a little bit, because he is all for Alcoholics Anonymous, I'll tell you. He's just my pal. And all of this because of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, that relationship with those people is because of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I could have lost all of that. But I have it because of Alcoholics Anonymous. We went and bought him, and I carried it out to the car after. We went and bought him a T-shirt with the St. Louis Blues on it, because everywhere I go where there's a baseball team or a hockey team, I have to buy him one of those. And he has a fine selection, but that's okay. Grandpas are supposed to do that. And I'm just so grateful for that. Because, you see, I do that quiet time, and I have prayed with every one of my grandchildren. And I taught that little guy a prayer. And the prayer says, it's a prayer that my grandmother taught me, and the prayer is, please God, treat me tomorrow as I've treated everybody today. And one day Gio was saying his prayers at home, and his daddy was standing up, and he said to his daddy, when Bob Cecil says prayers with me, we kneel down. And when they finished their make-up prayer, well, he said, hold it. Bob Cecil and I always finish our prayer with, please God, treat me tomorrow as I treat everybody today. And Tony, he didn't want to say that night. He's accused me of teaching his kid bad things. But imagine that, eh? To be able to pray with those kids and just, it's just the most fantastic relationship, and all because of what you people have given me. Step 12 said to me, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Spiritual awakening to me is simply a personality change. Change where I can accept things and where I can feel grateful. You people thank me for coming, and so many people says thanks for coming. I want to thank you for inviting me, because it is such a great thing to be 40 years after you join Alcoholics Anonymous. You know the great things that have happened to me. I was made Citizen of the Year in my town in 1984, all because of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so, you see, a spiritual awakening to me is a personality change, an attitude change where I'm full of gratitude. And gratitude is something you do and not something you talk about. And then it says we tried to carry the message to the alcoholic, it still suffers. And I know that a lot of us are trying to get somebody into Alcoholics Anonymous or into Al-Anon. But let's try to keep the people that we've got here. I mentioned that way back in step one. But let's tonight look at the people that maybe you can notice somebody that's not just feeling good. And put their arms around them and do like Bobby Motherwell did to me. He said, Cecil, we want you and we need you and we love you. Make them feel comfortable because we need you in Alcoholics Anonymous or Al-Anon or Al-Ateen. And then it says, practice the principles in all our affairs. You know, what principles are we talking about? Well, it says here in this card that we're talking about in step one, we're talking about honesty. Step two, we're talking about hope. Step three, faith. Step 4, courage. Step 5, integrity. Step 6, willingness. Step 7, humility. Step 8, brotherly love. Step 9, justice. Step 10, perseverance. Step 11, spirituality. And step 12, service to our fellow man. The greatest opportunity that any man can ever have is the opportunity to serve his fellow man. And we have that. We have it in Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to thank you for this very pleasurable privilege of being with you. I want to thank you, the audience, for being so great because you made it easy for me to talk because you listened. Last but not least, I want to say thanks to God for giving me one more beautiful today to allow me to do something in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm going to close this talk by saying that every one of you look real good on the outside. How are you really on the inside? Thank you and God bless you.